Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Hylda of the Icy Crown. So Hylda is a 4-mana Azorius commander. She's a 3/4, and she says whenever you tap an untapped creature an opponent controls, you can pay 1, and when you do, you either make a 4/4, put a +1 counter on each creature you control, or scry 2 and then draw a card. So any of these abilities are pretty good. The most obviously good one is scry 2 then draw. Then it's probably make a 4/4 and then after that +1 counters, but it really depends on where you are. So if you're earlier on in the game and you don't really have a board yet, you're probably just going to be scrying and drawing cards. If you've got enough cards, you're probably going to be making tokens, and then once you have enough creatures, you'll probably just start pumping everything. So with that said, obviously, we're going to need a lot of ramp because we have a 4-mana commander and we got to keep paying this 1 every time. It's very unfortunate that this isn't just free, that we do have to pay the 1. And we're going to need forced tap effect. So with that said, we do have some forced tap effects. We have things like Mind Over Matter, Opposition, and Retreat to Coral Helm. We also have Intruder Alarm because there's no guarantee that our opponent's creatures won't just already be tapped. So we want ways of untapping them. Therefore, Intruder Alarm works pretty well. So as long as we can just play 1 creature, or even just get the creature token off of Hylda, we can keep untapping the creatures. Like, we don't want to run out of tap creatures. We don't want our opponents to just be able to activate tap abilities or attack to completely mitigate Hylda's ability. So that's where Intruder Alarm comes in. And then, of course, it also just works really well with a lot of untapping stuff on our side of the board. And then we've got various other force taps. So Hylda's Crown of Winter, as the name suggests, works well with Hylda. 1 tap target creature. The ability costs 1 less to activate during your turn, so it's free. And you can pay 3 and sack it. Draw a card for each tapped creature your opponents control. And then down here, in a lot of other just various uncategorized manners, we've got a bunch of tapping effects. So there's a lot of ways to force taps in blue and white, but I ultimately decided to go with the cheaper ones in general. So Aeson Bureaucrats is tap target creature with power no greater than 2. Port Street Denizen taps something whenever a white creature enters. Divinant Trapper, whenever you cast a historic spell, tap something. Errant Doomsayers is basically just also Aeson Bureaucrat. Horn Line Slinger is tap target creature with power 3 or less. Niblis of the Urn, whenever it attacks, you may tap a creature. And Sunstrike Legionnaire, it doesn't untap normally, but whenever a creature enters, you can untap it and then tap target creature with mana value 3 or less. I mainly opted for the tap effects that didn't cost any mana. So there's a lot of tappers where you have to pay like 1 or you have to pay a white mana to use them. I ultimately opted for all of the ones that didn't cost anything. Although, to be fair, Port Street Denizen and Divinant Trapper do require that you actually cast something, so you kind of do need to cast, to pay mana for them, but not in the same way as like an ability that required activated mana. We also have Betrayal, enchant an opponent's creature, and if the enchanted creature becomes tapped, draw a card. And then probably the biggest thing that works with our commander, Verity Circle. Whenever a creature an opponent control becomes tapped, if it isn't being declared as an attacker, you may draw a card. Also, over here in the considerings, I had a bunch of other tap spells that I thought about having in the deck, but ultimately opted not to use for various reasons. So things like, Minister of Impediments, Lumen Grid Sentinel, like all of these could have hypothetically wound up in the deck, but I ultimately decided not to use them. It should also be noted that over here in removal, we have access to Curse of Chains and Narcolepsy, which are cards that tap the creature on upkeep. So these are other ways of just triggering a tap every single turn. And finally, there's Hammers of Moradin, a myriad creature that when it attacks, for each opponent, tap up to 1 target creature that player controls. So the rest of the deck, we do have some just regular old card draw, some regular old counter spells. Poppelgeist as another tapper that we do need Delirium to keep using it, but it's at least tapped the first time, and then once we get Delirium, we can keep tapping stuff. And as far as our tappers, this is the absolute cheapest one we have access to at only 1 mana. Pretty straightforward on the lands here. Nothing too much to see. A lot of protection. We want to make sure that Hylda doesn't get countered or killed, so that's what all of these cards are for. Bunch of ramp, as previously mentioned. We need a lot of mana for our 4-mana commander that we have to keep paying 1 for. Also, it's important to note that for every one of these ramp spells that's a creature, all of them get to untap when Intruder Alarm is in play. So every creature that we play untaps all of these guys, and then we can keep using this mana. The rest of our removal, not just Narcolepsy and Curse of Chains, also pretty straightforward here. Again, anything that's a creature will trigger Intruder Alarm. And then it's also worth noting for something like Opposition that we can use our creatures to tap opposing anything, not just creatures. So we could, for example, tap down our opponent's lands. But that is pretty much going to do it. Just control the board, eventually make enough 4/4s and +1 counters to overrun the opponent, or just draw cards and scry if you need the card advantage. And that is going to do it for Hylda of the Icy Crown in EDH.